Thank you, Richie, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this warm and humid July afternoon. We have two excellent speakers today. I'm really excited to hear what they have to share with us. The first speaker is Dr. Damon Abdi, who is an assistant professor of landscape horticulture at the Louisiana State University AgCenter Hammond Research Station. His program seeks to support the sustainability of the green industry through developing research-based solutions to address issues such as irrigation and runoff management, plant establishment, and temperature moderation in the landscape. His extension program focuses on providing usable information to gardeners at every level: professional horticulturists, seasoned garden enthusiasts, and novice gardeners, by creating a wide range of materials, resources, and always fun publications to spread the joy of horticulture. Welcome, Damon. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Panisi. Thank you to everybody for this Getting the Best of Pests webinar. We're certainly going to try to get the best of them today. Let me share my screen and get this pulled up. Everything look good?
It switched it around on us again.
How's that?
We're not seeing it just yet. It still looks like the presenter screen.
Okay, let's see. How about now?
No, we're still seeing that. This has happened to Dan and I before. Can
Let me
you
stop
stop your
sharing.
share? And if you can, just share the whole screen. Dan and I found that when it does that to us, it's because it's wigging out over sharing the app instead of the screen.
How's this
So
now?
we're seeing the presenter screen again. Perfect. Got it.
Okay.
Got it.
All right. Lovely. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be on here. Damon Abdi over at the LSU AgCenter Hammond Research Station. So certainly if there's one thing we know about, it's dealing with heat. And today I'm going to talk about how we can manage mulch for landscape beds. And rather than just a simple task that we often overlook, we're going to get really into the weeds and look at some of the research-based approaches and then how we can apply that in the real world. So to start it off, I'm over at the Hammond Research Station, so about halfway between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And I work with the LSU Ag Center, specialize in landscape horticulture, mostly research and extension. And my extension program focuses on helping out landscape contractors, landscape architects, and also just hobby horticulturalists. And my research program is heavily focused on green infrastructure and landscape management. And at the end of it, I really try to focus on practical solutions for industry members. Growing up, I worked in the landscape industry and residential, commercial, a lot of different things. And one task that I had to do pretty much all the time was mulching. Now, why do we mulch? Well, there's a lot of problems with having bare soil surfaces, just as we see with this urban tree right here. And when we put plants into tough environments, our goal is to support them and give them conditions that are going to be conducive to long-term health. So what happens if we don't cover some ground and protect our plants? Well, you can get compaction issues from pedestrians, you can get injury to trees, and you can also have very rapidly fluctuating temperatures because mulch is, if anything, really just a jacket for the soil and the growing conditions. So mulch became kind of an interesting idea because not only is it offering insulation in the landscape, but it's also adding some aesthetics rather than just a bunch of soil that's compacted. You can have different textures, different colors, and you can use that as an artistic feature in the landscape. So when it comes to putting down mulch, of course, one of our most popular mulches in the region is pine straw. So questions that typically come up with this is exactly how much pine straw, how much mulch is necessary. So our goals are to insulate the soil, limit weed growth, and create a nice, aesthetically pleasing atmosphere. And if you ask people, you're going to get a whole range of answers about how much pine straw to put down. But generally, people are going to say somewhere between 2 inches and 8 inches. Now, that's quite a gap. And people realistically aren't going there measuring it. but it's still important to get an idea of what these depths could have effect on the soil. So one of the first studies we did was looking at different depths of pine straw on these model replicated plots. So these plots, we installed some soil sensors into the subsurface. And then within these plots, there was either 0, 2, 4, or 6 inches of pine straw added on. And after setting up this project, this was in spring of 2023, we monitored for about 3 months just to get an idea of how these different depths were going to affect soil conditions during a spring season. And when we think of the spring season, of course, we're thinking of warm days, cool nights, and a lot of highs and lows and fluctuations. So we put this in Valentine's Day of 2023 and ran it for 3 months. And this is the first of many charts we're going to look at. So in this chart here, the first thing I want you to take a look at is that air temperature chart. So you see that the air temperature between February 14th and May 7th is going up and down, and it's following a lot of these patterns, both daily, but also within, between days and within days, cool nights, warm days, you're seeing these fluctuations happen. And our goal specifically with mulching, thinking in the spring, is putting enough insulation. That way we can buffer these extremes. So that way when it gets super hot, the soil's not going to heat up as quickly. And when it gets super cold, the soil's not going to cool down as quickly. So starting off with that air temperature, we see that's up and down, and it's running quite a range from up to about 77 degrees Fahrenheit down to about 42 degrees Fahrenheit. So pretty on par for a spring for us. The next thing you're going to notice are 4 solid colored lines. The black line in this case is our bare plots. Absolutely no mulch. There's no insulation, no protection from the environment. Red lines are 2 inches, blue lines 4 inches, and yellow lines are 6 inches. So a few things when we're looking at this chart to keep in mind is that, yes, those air temperatures are fluctuating very, very rapidly, peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys. But we see that with no mulch, we are still having pretty high peaks and valleys. But then with increasing depths of mulch, 2 inches, 4 inches, and 6 inches, those waves are becoming a lot more compressed, meaning that it's not getting as hot and it's not getting as cold. And kind of in a Goldilocks situation, we want to maintain temperatures in a nice, even keeled area. So that way plants are not going to get too stressed out in either way. So the key takeaway from this image is that, yep, spring temperatures are going to fluctuate wildly, and that no mulch is not going to give you any protection. But then the more mulch you add, the more protection you have. Now, the take-home message from this article, which was published in 2023 in HortTechnology, which is open access. It's a very quick study. It's only 2 pages, so feel free to read that, digest it. You can always send me questions later on. But to really put a whole synopsis on it, without pine straw, soil temperatures are going to fluctuate rapidly. And that even just 2 inches of pine straw is going to have a significant effect in terms of keeping temperatures in a more moderated level. But there's a point of diminishing returns. And we observed that between 4 inches of pine straw and 6 inches of pine straw, you're getting pretty much the exact same effect in terms of soil insulation, at least statistically. So the key takeaways from this is that a little bit of mulch goes a long way and will help. But at a certain point, there are diminishing returns. And as a landscape contractor, you've got to think about the financials in that. Is it worth putting on a bunch of extra mulch, knowing that it might not give you that much advantage after a certain point? So we're just going to keep that in mind. We have a discussion section at the end where we're really going to apply these concepts. But that's enough about pine straw. So one of the best things about mulch and doing mulch research is that everybody does it. And in my extension tours, I see all kinds of questions from landscape contractors to homeowners, etc. And one of the big questions people have is all about the different colored dyed mulches. So our first common question was, does the depth of mulch make that much of a difference? And we certainly saw in the pine straw study that we just discussed that depth of mulch will impact what the soil temperatures are going to be like and how much moderation happens. But does the color of mulch affect soil temperatures? So a lot of people are of the belief that a dark mulch, a black mulch, might get hotter than a lighter colored mulch. And that is something that we are intent on investigating. We got dyed shredded wood mulch. So this is all locally sourced shredded wood mulch, and it all had either black dye, brown dye, or red dye. So those were our treatments, black, brown, and red dyed mulch. And then, of course, we had our blank, which was no mulch. This is our control. This was just simply the landscape bed surface. And again, we wanted to look at mulch application depths. We know that the depth of pine straw certainly has an effect on soil temperatures, but we're interested to see what the effects are with this shredded hardwood. So we looked at just two depths in this case, 2 inches versus 4 inches. And then we put our temperature sensors. So of course we measured temperature in that past study where we were just looking at subsurface temperature, but we were really interested in looking at temperature at 2 depths in the soil profile within this study. So to give a little more background on this study before we get too much into it, we cleared off this research plot. So we stripped off whatever top material was there, existing vegetation and other kind of materials. We regraded the site and we compacted the soil. Now, we're talking about measuring soil temperature, and naturally there's different types of soils out there, and we need to be cognizant of which kind of soil we're working with. So that begs the question, did we consider soil type? Well, we absolutely did. And in a way to accommodate that, we prepared the site by making it all uniform landscape bed mix. So we built up 6 inches of our typical landscape bed mix that we use here at the station, which is a blend predominantly of bark fines and coarse bark, but it also has some sand in it as well. So this is what we use in all of our beds out here. And this is going to be representative of the conditions that plants would grow in. Either way, we wanted to just standardize it throughout the entire plot. So we had 21 different mulch plots, and when we installed this in March 12th of 2024, we decided to make mulch rings, and we spaced these out 7 feet apart, and we got all of our plots all lined up, and then it was time to put temperature sensors in. So keywords we're going to use subsurface, which is of course going to be within that landscape bedding mix, and where we installed a temperature sensor about 3 inches below the surface of this material. Now we calibrated these sensors to measure temperature every 30 minutes, and then we buried it back up in each of these individual plots. And then it's tucked in nicely, and it's continuously measuring temperature every 30 minutes, out of sight, out of mind. Now, the next step was to put our surface temperature. So we wanted to look at subsurface. So that's where the plant roots are going to be. And that's a little bit more insulated because it's deeper in the soil. But when we're thinking about, certainly in the heat of summer, we're thinking about how hot it can get right at the top of materials, at the top of the soil surface. So we installed surface sensors directly on top of that landscape bed mulch. And then we added in either 2 inches or 4 inches of mulch over the top of it. And the plots that were our blanks or our controls were just left uncovered. So we used some pretty high-tech methods to get these nice, neat mulch rings. We were able to get some hula hoops and stack them to the appropriate depths to get either 2 inches or 4 inches. And then we filled it up with either the black, brown, or red mulch and got these nice rings here. And really the goal for all this was just to get the same kind of materials and same kind of setups that most homeowners would do. They'd go to their big box store, supplier, load up the truck, and then get all these materials and put it out there. Now, just to give a little bit of a better visual cross-section of how this might look, you'll notice at the bottom we have our compacted native soil. Then we've got our landscape bed mix over the top. And then we have our mulch rings. Now the mulch rings, of course, are the different colors. And then you'll see those two sensors. So your subsurface temperature is buried 3 inches below the mulch. That's in the heart of that landscape bed mix. So it's plenty insulated and it's where the roots are going to be growing. And then we put a sensor right within that mulch itself. And just to emphasize this point again, remember we're looking at 4-inch depths and 2-inch depths of mulch. So the shorter depth of mulch is going to be closer to the sensor. And then naturally, an uncovered sensor is fully exposed to the environment. Now, we ran the study for a year and we collected data every 30 minutes. Nobody on earth has the amount of time to go through all of that data. So I cherry picked some points just to kind of help shed some light on the concepts we looked at. So today we are just going to look at 2 model months, better yet, a week within these 2 model months. And we chose March because that is right after installation. So the material is freshly laid out, everything is brand new, and the mulches haven't faded at all. So it's right after installation. And also the environmental conditions at this time, we've got warm days and then we've got cool nights. But if anyone knows anything about how Julys can be in South Louisiana, it's hot all the time and it is just brutal heat. So we're really pushing it to the max. So we're just going to be looking at March, and then we're also going to be looking at the hellacious part of the summer. We got a lot of charts to go, and I'm going to break them up into different ways and kind of highlight certain points here. We're going to start out with March of 2024. These are all of the unmulched plots. So absolutely no mulch, no insulation. The solid line you have is the blank, that is the surface temperature. So that is the sensor that is sitting right on top of the landscape bed mix, and it's getting the full brunt of the environment. The dashed line is the subsurface temperature. That is what's buried 3 inches into the bed mix. The key takeaway from this image is that without any cover, those sensors at the surface are exhibiting a lot of those fluctuations we'd expect. It gets really hot during the day, and then it cools down a lot at night, and you see these peaks and valleys. But just 3 inches below the soil surface, you're seeing, again, we do have some peaks and valleys, but those are more like slight hills, if anything. It's just a little bit up, a little bit down. It's a lot more evenly moderated. So that's common sense and makes enough sense and easy to follow. And we're going to see that same pattern in July. We're going to see that uncovered sensors with the full exposure to the sun are going to get super warm during the day and then super cool at night. Whereas just 3 inches below that substrate surface, you're going to see that temperatures are much more muted. It's much more even, hovering in that certain range. We're going to put these 2 images side to side and just make a few notes. So the first thing is there's massive differences in temperature ranges. Certainly between March and July, like we'd expect, we're looking at 2 completely different ranges of temperatures. Now, we look at this, and as a caveat, 50 degrees Celsius is 122 degrees Fahrenheit, which is an awful lot of heat for that soil surface. And it got me thinking, what are we dealing with here? But soils can get very hot. I mean, even in England, a notoriously cool climate, surfaces can easily go over 30 degrees Celsius there. South Louisiana's a fair bit hotter, obviously. And then if, we know how hot soils can be, especially we know surfaces like asphalt can be super hot. Now, just keeping in mind, could the sensors be roasting out there in the sun a little bit? Maybe. But what we still notice is that these subsurface temperatures are still going to be very, very hot, especially in July, where they're still hovering around 30 degrees Celsius. So a few things from this: surface temperatures are going to fluctuate wildly. So with no cover, you're going to get what you're going to expect. During the day, it's going to get super hot. During night, it's going to be cool. Whereas subsurface temperatures are more modestly maintained. But what are we here for? We're here to talk about mulch. And that begs a couple questions. First off, depth has to have an effect, right? After all, we saw in the pine straw study and common sense that a thicker application depth is going to keep temperatures a lot more stable. But what we weren't so sure about was whether color was going to have an effect on temperature. So moving into our next plot, next chart, we're looking at March 2024. So again, we're looking at that solid blue line, which is the blank temperatures. We're seeing peaks and valleys in the surface. But 2 inches of black mulch does a pretty good job of muting some of those differences. So even just a little bit of mulch is going to keep that surface from getting too hot or too cold. So that's black mulch at 2 inches compared to the blank. Now we're going to add in the brown mulch at 2 inches to this figure. It's pretty clear to see that the brown mulch and the black mulch, those lines pretty much cover each other up exactly. So doesn't really appear to be differences between temperature in this case. Let's add in the red mulch to that as well. Again, we're basically seeing 3 lines that are almost exactly the same, and that really kind of ties it all together. Let's see if we can remove the blank temperature, so that way we can only see the 3 different mulch colors at 2 inches. Well, we do that and we still see there's almost no differences. We really can't see any differences between the colors at 2 inches at the surface in March. Now, the next question we want to ask is, does depth have an effect? So the solid black line is black mulch applied at 2 inches, whereas the dashed black line is black mulch applied at 4 inches. So in this, you see that the 2 inch, you still have a lot of peaks and valleys, but that the 4 inches of mulch is going to be a lot more stable again. So increasing the depth of mulch reduces how extreme those peaks and valleys become. So that's black mulch at 2 inches versus 4 inches at the surface. Now, this is pretty much the same thing that we're seeing with brown mulch, 2 inches versus 4 inches. Same thing with red mulch as well. Now, to put it all in perspective, our blank surface temperatures, but then all 6 of our different mulches, black at 2 inches or 4 inches, brown at 2 inches or 4 inches, or red at 2 inches or 4 inches. When we put it all together, it's clear that the one thing that we can see is that mulch, regardless of color, regardless of the depth applied in this case, kept those temperatures a lot more stable. And it appears that having a thicker depth of mulch is going to give you a lot more temperature stability, but pretty evident to look that that color is really not having an effect at all. Moving on to our subsurface temperatures. So this was those sensors that were buried about 3 inches deep into that landscape bed. And you see peaks and valleys with our blank. So it does have the insulation just because it's buried 3 inches, but we still see the expected peaks and valleys. Here is all 3 of the colors at 2 inches in that subsurface temperature. So again, key takeaway from this is that the 3 colors at this depth are pretty much all overlapping. So key takeaway from this, color doesn't seem to matter. Certainly doesn't matter when you remove the blank. We're getting really no differences between treatments in the subsurface between the different colors. When we look at the subsurface temperatures for the mulches applied at 4-inch depths, again, we see it kind of all overlap. And then when we put all the different colors and all the different depths together, we see that there's basically no differences. So we just went through about a dozen charts all throughout March. And if they were to distill this down to a key takeaway, it's that absolutely no mulch, you're going to have a lot of fluctuations. Even a little bit of mulch does make a difference. If you apply 4 inches of mulch rather than 2 inches, it's going to be a lot more stable. And lastly, color doesn't really seem to make an effect here in this case. So that's March of 2024, but that's a cool part of the season. It's definitely not going to be like it is in July. So similar pattern as we saw with the March figures. We're going to see the same things in July, but mind you, of course, we're just working with temperatures that are a little bit more elevated, so I'm a little higher into the spectrum. So going through that again, in our surface temperatures in July, the black mulch was still buffering it a little bit. So having no cover at the surface, black mulch is going to keep it cooler than having no cover at all, even at 2 inches. Now here's black mulch at 2 inches, brown mulch at 2 inches, and red mulch at 2 inches. And again, we see that regardless of color, as long as the depth's the same, you're pretty much seeing the same effect regardless of color. There might be micro differences on individual days or at certain times a day, but there's a lot of data analysis to see if there's really something to it. But it doesn't look like there's a lot of smoke there to think that there's a fire when it comes to color having an effect on temperature. Again, it's the same things that we see with the same color, but at different depths. So in this case, a 2-inch depth of black mulch is still going to have a lot of peaks and valleys, whereas a 4-inch depth of black mulch is going to be a lot more muted peaks and valleys. So the same thing we saw before. This is what we're seeing with black mulch at 2 and 4. It's what we're seeing with brown mulch at 2 inches and 4 inches. And it's also what we're seeing with red mulch at 2 inches and 4 inches. Now we're putting everything all together. And again, our key takeaway from this is that the thicker application depth, regardless of color, is giving you a lot more temperature stability, and it doesn't matter. Color doesn't really seem to matter at all. And the thinner layers of mulch are going to have more fluctuations. Finishing out, looking at the subsurface temperatures, tying it all together, we see that really, again, no differences in black, brown, and red lines. So color of mulch is not really having an effect in subsurface, whether it's 2 inches or whether it's 4 inches. And then when we put them all together, we really don't see anything. At a certain point, it's deep enough that it's not going to matter. So that was a lot of charts. And if you made it through that without falling asleep, I'm going to wrap it up in just a couple of key takeaways from that color. So the depth of mulch is clearly an important factor. We've shown that with pine straw, that statistically 2 inches of mulch makes a bigger difference. It certainly has an impact versus bare soil, but quantifiably 4 inches or 6 inches of pine straw doesn't really matter. You're getting the same soil effects, which brought up our next question, which is, does the color of mulch matter? And based on the data we have, based on the information that we've analyzed, color does not really seem to matter that much. So at least based on what I'm gathering, if people are saying, if I put out black mulch, is that going to make it hotter than brown mulch? I wouldn't think so. But the key thing is really a thicker application depth is going to create more stable temperatures. And we got to think about that for all season. A thick application depth during the cool part of the season is going to keep soils warmer during spring and fall and winter, so it doesn't get as brutally cold. But it'll also keep it a little bit cooler during summer, so it doesn't get as brutally hot. So really the name of the game appears to be more application depth than color. And I showed about 20 different charts to really hammer that home. So instead, I'm going to show you something a little bit more relaxing, if you want to call it that. So we did other kinds of research with mulch and testing other common questions like, is there risks for flammability? Now, I don't have to tell you that dried pine straw can certainly be very flammable. And we ignited these 4 quadrants with one of 4 ignition sources. And then we saw how long it took to burn out these little plots just to see how fast some of this mulch materials might catch fire and burn through. And yes, running around making sure that we didn't burn the whole station down was very important. Tried a lot of different things. So a propane torch certainly lit up very quickly and caused the fire to happen. Matches certainly worked well to start the fire. Interestingly enough, a cigarette on its own was not just going to burst into flames on the pine straw. Now, still wouldn't recommend anyone test that theory, but it was interesting just to see that anecdote. Something else that was interesting, though, is we're in backyard barbecue season. And whether you like propane or charcoal, one thing you want to be careful about is having accidental fires happen. So we dropped a smoldering charcoal in that flame in that little quadrant. And after about 15 minutes, it was just sitting there smoldering, but then it suddenly burst into flames and caught that plot on fire. So some things to think about: don't obviously drop matches or get, too creative with your propane torch, and use an ashtray. And if you're barbecuing out there and you drop that charcoal, it might not immediately ignite, but keep an eye on it. It might burst into flames after 10 minutes. We certainly saw that in this case. Outside of charts and outside of testing flammability on things, we got to think about how this is going to apply to real world situations for our landscape contractors. So tying all this information together, we got to think about what makes sense. And it's going to be about, from a business perspective, it's going to be a case by case basis. So we look at the image on the left, that's a golf course in New Orleans, and they put on a very, very thick layer of pine straw. Now, what were some of their thoughts? Well, it's a massive area and distance aesthetics of the mulch is prioritized. On a golf course, that is the aesthetics is one of the most important things, if not the most important things. And budget is really not a concern. So covering that entire area is important, and they're going to put a thicker application depth. And they really want to do this as a once a year job. You'd rather get that pine straw out there and then not have to worry about the rest of the year. And your goal is to prevent weeds at all costs. Now we can contrast that with a small planting box in New Orleans on the right. And some of the observations with that, so we got an Indian hawthorns growing in there. We see that this is above ground, and these are small plants. So is there sensitivity to weather? Certainly if you're above ground and you're not as insulated. Other things to think about. Well, aesthetics certainly matter, but do you really want to overstuff these little planting beds and then have the pine straw easily blow out or wash out from these beds? So too much mulch would detract from the aesthetics and maybe even cover up some of that Indian hawthorn. You also got to think about what kind of business you're operating. If you're doing a lot of urban landscaping, you might want certain contracts that you're doing follow-up visits, whether you're putting down pre-emerge, whether you're topping off these beds. So from a job security method, it might make sense to just keep adding a little bit more in time rather than put all your pine straw at once. The other thing is you want to be cognizant of what kind of pressures you might have. So weeds can grow anywhere, of course, but when you're in an urban environment, certainly you can still have weeds, but you're probably going to be able to protect yourself a little bit more. You're not covering as much of an area. It's easy enough to hand weed a small little planting box like that, but I certainly wouldn't want to hand weed throughout the golf course's mulch area there. And also think about how you're going to apply the mulch to this. Image on the left, you're going to take a trailer full of pine straw, most likely, start at the center, and then work in concentric circles outside of that to drop off your mulch. Whereas in the right image, you're just going to bring a couple bales and top it off as needed. Other kind of applications that we can think about. So rain gardens are certainly an important feature in the landscape. And we're directing all this runoff water directly into these rain gardens and allowing it to seep into the soil. But it's important that we don't let it dry out too quickly. We've selected plants that are going to do well in moist soils. And if those soils dry out way too fast, we're not going to have a good time. Those plants certainly aren't either. So in a rain garden, it makes a lot of sense to have a nice thick layer of mulch to really protect it from sunny, hot areas. So that way you're not evaporating off as much water as you would. You can instead let the plant have it and also let it soak into the soil. Conversely, if you want to have more surface evaporation, maybe cutting down the mulch might be a good idea. But that's an important way to kind of think about how you might integrate that into the landscape depending on a variety of settings. So some of the future directions of the mulch research are going to move away, not completely, but into looking at some of the inorganic materials. And stone mulches are very popular. And there's several reasons why. Certainly the aesthetic, when you've got some kind of river rock, it can certainly look good with the rounded edges and give it some nice look and texture. But also, once you put those stones in there, you don't really have to replenish it. That's not something you have to worry about so much like organic materials. But also, when you've got areas that are getting a lot of water, you can mitigate how much of the organic material might float away. It can also help with managing water flow, erosion, etc. So looking at how stones can be integrated into the landscape can really be important. And this is certainly true in a lot of cases where you've got parking lot islands and other features where water might be coming in and out, or where continual maintenance is not something you really want to do. And having stones and having mulches like that really, really can help. So just different ways to think about what material you're going to use in different settings. Other types of mulches in more unconventional senses is working with our landscape and other features around it. So gotta love camellias. It adds a lot of splash of color in the cool season, all different kinds of colors, flowers, red, gold, green, pink, and white, etc. Shishi camellias right here look really nice. Written about this in Karma Camellia. And you'll see all different kinds of features of these winter show-stopping plants. But after the petals fall, you get this nice, natural-looking mulch that really adds a unique character to the landscape when the rest of the landscape might not be in its full glory. So think a little bit creatively when it comes to that. Natural mulches. So why buy mulch when you have it for free right under your trees a lot of the time? And it's really important to think about what trees you're working with. So here is a southern magnolia. So of course, evergreen leaves, very large. They've got nice dark green tops and then that kind of rusty colored underside. So very coarse leaves, very thick, and they're going to create a very thick, nice, dense mulch that can certainly be aesthetic. Now, some people say, I don't want to see leaves in my landscape. And to that, I say, leave it be. Leaving leaves in the landscape is a great method to support a lot of very beneficial insects. People wonder all the time where the fireflies are going. A lot of them overwinter in leaf litter, lady beetles, and all other kinds of important biodiversity that can help keep a landscape looking good. So if you're looking for an excuse to be lazy, leave the leaves in the landscape. And it can really create a nice composition as well. So this is on Baton Rouge's campus. You've got a live oak and then you've got some azaleas underneath it. So with that nice natural brown look as that mulch on the bottom, when those azaleas go into bloom, it's going to really pop out and help exacerbate that color, make it look really, really nice. A couple of things just as we're finishing out. What is the biggest issue that, as an extension person, that I see when I get calls about trees failing? Well, it's trees being planted too deeply or people putting way too much mulch. Got called out to a client and saw this one site, and after exhuming what was left of, we had to dig pretty hard to find that root flare. After several inches going down and removing some of this mulch, it's very, very important to communicate to people that too much mulch, and especially piling it up on the trunk, is a problem. So really communicating with homeowners or anybody that do not make those mulch volcanoes and do not bury the root flare is very important. A couple other fun images that I just wanted to kind of throw in here. So on the image on the left, this is outside of a seafood restaurant, and oysters are expensive, but they can also, those shells can make a decent mulch that kind of adds this unique kind of character towards it. So that was pretty neat to see that outside of a restaurant. And again, just another image of having stones in the landscape. So some of these inorganic materials really add a nice texture and look to the landscape. Circling back to think about colors of mulch, we can think about how different colors might be used to harmonize other features in the landscape. So in this is outside of a library in New Orleans. So they've got red sidewalks and they've got red mulch. So it really harmonizes together and creates a nice cohesive look to the landscape that can be pretty appealing. And it also helps pop out the green of those plants behind it, at least unless you have red, green color blindness. But red also is a very attractive to the eye color. It generates a lot of attention. And I say that in a good and a bad sense. Some people hate how much attention it attracts, but I commonly see red mulch or very bright colored mulches like this in commercial sites because it's going to attract people's attention and possibly they're going to want to spend money at that place. But you also see a lot of stones. So on the image on the left is outside of a fast food restaurant. They really do not want to do a lot of maintenance there. So stones is a very long-term look for a very minimalist landscape. Image on the right is a house I visited where they were very intentional with their rock selection. They really went for a Japanese garden theme in it that really looked nice. And they were very intentional with their stone use. So if you're using stones as a mulch, maybe it's on a side of ease, or maybe it's on a side of aesthetics. A couple other things in different kind of parking lots, especially ones where you don't want to have a bunch of irrigation or you want to choose plants that are going to create a certain motif or scene. Rocks really add a nice feature to that as well. And you might even see the lava rocks as well. So we talked about how red mulch, the shredded mulch, attracts attention. Well, you get the features of that with lava rocks for mulch, both the color, but also the texture, especially that kind of coarse feel it has, that I think can be interesting. And just to tie it off with one more final thought, remember why we're putting mulch down. Aesthetics, certainly, and that's really just up to your customer. And it's not like you're going to go out there and you're going to say, do you want 4 inches of mulch? We're going to go measure out 4 inches. No, you're going to put enough so that it looks good. But one of our big things we really want to think about is keeping things weed free. And remember, mulch is a tool for that, but we can manage weeds using a combo of variety of things: cultural applications, routine hand weeding, mowing, mulching. And of course, we can use chemicals to really address those issues. But there's also little things that we can do as landscapers to kind of help reduce issues. Clean out equipment so that way you don't have a bunch of thatch buildup in your mowers or weeds being left over. Sanitizing pruners to limit disease movement is also a good practice as well. So at the end of the day, our goal is to create healthy, sustainable landscapes. Mulches can help moderate soil conditions, suppress weeds, and can also be aesthetically pleasing. And this is probably the most you've thought about mulch in a long time. And in that case, if you've got any questions or you want to continue the conversation, here is some of my contact information. And if I've got time for questions, which I believe I might, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Damon. That was super, super interesting. And speaking for myself, I thoroughly enjoyed those graphs. So, yeah, you did a great job with the graphs too. We have a couple of questions, and if we have time, I would add a couple of my own. And we do have time. So, I'll just jump in and read one, the first one for you. Can mulch keep moisture in the soil better than pine straw?
So that's a great question. And I, based on the research, I don't have research that answers that question. So I can't necessarily speak about whether one material is going to work better than another. But I will say this anecdotally. For the pine straw study, we did measure soil moisture, but we were irrigating frequently enough that there weren't any differences that we could see. So it's all going to depend when you're talking about the moisture management. It's going to depend on rainfall, how frequently you're irrigating, and to really say whether one material is going to work better at retaining moisture than another. But certainly an interesting question I could look at in the future.
Thank you. The next question is, clients are always asking which mulch is best to put next to the house that does not attract roaches and termites.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So for me, I would say it's some kind of stones, anything that's, organic, wood, you're going to be having some kind of concerns. For me, I think it makes a lot of sense to have, a nice gravel or something around the house, because that way you can more easily see things, pull weeds out, and you're not mowing or maintaining up close to it. Other reasons why you might want gravel on the outside is, think about if you've got, air handlers or AC units or something where those are going to be on some kind of a pad. You don't want a bunch of vegetation and things growing up around it. Now, I can't really comment about whether one organic material is better for a mulch right up to the foundation, but that's my thoughts. I'd keep it inorganic if it was me, but that's not the end all and be all.
Thank you. And as a follow up to this conversation, Joshua is adding that keeping the ground cover a few inches from the foundation of the home helps as well. And that makes perfect sense. Lori has a question. Isn't using stone going to get the root zones too hot?
I've got great news for you, Lori. I've got a master's student who's starting up this fall, and that is actually the next iteration of these studies. So we're going to be looking at landscape stones and seeing the effect of that on soil temperatures. And then we're also going to be integrating plants into that to see if physiological changes happen to the plants with that. So I think that's going to be another kind of thing where I think that's going to depend on the material, the stone itself. Anecdotally, I mean, we know what asphalt or concrete feels like in the heat. We know how hot that can get. And I think stones, at least when we had our hellacious drought of 2023, when it was just unrelenting heat, the plants that I saw suffering the most anecdotally were in, a lot of stone mulches or rubber mulches or things of that nature. So we're really excited to see that, and stay tuned. We should have some answers for that in the coming years about stones.
Well, we're going to certainly be looking forward to this research, and I hope it all goes well. Speaking of stone as mulch, I do have a question and some of my own thoughts on the subject, my own observations. What do you think about the color of stones itself? Like, for example, there is a area nearby where they have put in pretty large chunks. Not that's beyond gravel. I mean, we're talking some almost like half boulder size. I think part of it is because they want to discourage foot traffic over certain beds, and if you step on it, you'll roll your ankle. So that'll be a lesson learned. But it's like white. And I've been noticing the health of the plants, both shrubs, some perennials, and also some trees. And it just seems to me, and I don't know if it's just that, probably a combination of factors, but the plants appear stressed. And to me, it looks like they're going, especially the trees are going into somewhat of an earlier dormancy. And I was thinking that might be that the white, just really reflective surface color, is perhaps causing additional light stress, even when it's reflecting. So anyway, I'll welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and to your point, so like you said, there's some places they use the very coarse, more like rip rock that you see kind of in drainage channels. And like you said, there's an element of security in it. People walking on it are going to twist their ankle, but it certainly has some aesthetics to it. I think I think you're spot on when it comes to the light reflecting. And that was, that's kind of the sentiment that I have, and I've kind of been hearing around, and especially with some of that reflection going from a unique angle. It's not the top leaves getting the ton of the sun onto it. It's the bottom leaves getting this light reflected back onto it. So I'd speculate that that might be an impact on it. And that's why we're so excited to do some of that stone research, because, are the darker stone colors, are those going to warm up and retain heat, but potentially with those lighter stones reflect color and create stress on their own. And these are questions where, when we do those studies, we're going to compare different types of stones, but we're also going to have organic material. We'll have a pine straw. We'll have, a shredded wood or something in there. So that way we've got something to contrast that to.
Yeah, that'll be really, really interesting to see. I'm also thinking about from a different perspective in terms of water percolation through the soil profile and the size of the rocks and the nature of the rocks themselves. Like, for example, if you have like smooth, it creates somewhat of a smooth channels and the water goes through quite quickly. But then you have these downpours, and then when you have so much water coming in such short time, would that even get to the roots in the amount that the roots would need, especially if we're having a mature landscape that typically does not have an irrigation system in place? So anyway.
Yeah, and those are going to be some really kind of interesting questions. And I think what makes it unique is the right mulch. We always talk about right plant, right place, but I don't think we talk enough about right mulch, right application. And an urban environment where a quick rainfall is going to put a ton of water, you're going to want to probably facilitate that infiltration. And stones would be good for that. And then you also got to be concerned about, other kinds of, organic materials, maybe matting up or washing out too easily. Stones aren't going to wash out, but organic material might. And you got to be, just kind of cognizant of that. So a lot of different angles to approach it.
Maybe perhaps even a mixture of and gravel plus organic plus inorganic to some extent, maybe even checking on some ratios of things. Yeah, the research possibilities are limitless, isn't it?
Yeah,
Once we started getting into these, we scientists get quite dorky in our ideas.
Hey, that's what it's all about, though.
Absolutely. Well, we only have a couple more minutes to the top of the hour, and I'm going to see if anyone else has a question. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the second study that you shared with, do you have those published?
So that's we stopped collecting data in March of this year. So the data is one complete calendar year. So working on getting that published, targeting HortTech or one of the ASHS journals. Hopefully have that out sometime later this year. But there's a lot of data. Yeah, we've got data from every 30 minutes from 21 plots at 2 depths and over 12 months. So a lot of different ways to play with it. I had a ton more charts. I mean, I could do a lot more of those charts, but I appreciate, everybody kind of being able to get that sneak preview towards it and kind of see, hopefully, you can get some takeaways from that, at least for now.
Oh, it's definitely sparked quite a bit of conversations. And I really enjoyed you sharing the videos of the different types of matches. And anyway, I was having some questions when I was watching it in terms of the windy conditions, was like still air versus winds. I mean, I can only imagine that even the slightest wind is really going to speed up the whole fire propagation. So
Well, that was that we're not going to publish any of that. That was a yeah, that was more of like a fun trial that we were doing for a couple other things, but that was definitely it was a unique experience. I'll say that. I was running around putting out fires quite literally. But yeah, I think there's so many different factors with that, and I wouldn't want to publish something where I'm giving flammability safety recommendations. That was more just fun anecdote, but I needed to give people at least something to fire them up after 20 something charts in a row.
I appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you again so much.